Question 13. Which of the following statements is correct concerning the reasonable person standard in tort law? A. The reasonable person standard varies from person to person. B. The reasonable person standard focuses on the defendant's subjective mental state rather than on the defendant's behavior. C. A person with a physical disability must act as would a reasonable person with the same disability. Or D. A person with a mental disability must act as would a person with the same mental disability. Let's review the idea of the reasonable person test. Basically, the reasonable person test is an ideal that focuses on how a typical person with ordinary sensibilities would act in certain situations. The test asks to whether a person has acted as a reasonable person is an objective one, and so it does not take into account the specific disabilities or abilities of a defendant. Now let's take a look at the answer choices. A. The reasonable person standard varies from person to person. Now this is A is incorrect because a reasonable person, like I said from before, is an objective idea of how a person with normal prudence would properly act in a given situation. It's not the different personalities of a different people. It's about this ideal of a reasonable person. So therefore A is incorrect. B. The reasonable person standard focuses on the defendant's subjective mental state rather than on the defendant's behavior. Now B is incorrect because courts do not focus on the defendant's subjective mental state, but they focus on whether the defendant is acting as a reasonable person. Courts use an objective way of looking at things when finding out whether the defendant is being a reasonable person. They cannot adhere towards a subjective standard to see if they are a reasonable person, because that would create a very difficult way to quantify if people are considered being reasonable. Now, D. A person with a mental disability must act as would a person with the same mental disability. Now, while D may sound correct, it's really incorrect. It's incorrect because it's very difficult to measure and compare the capacity of one's own mental disability with a person with a similar disability. And since there is an ambiguity on how to measure mental disability from person to person, the court cannot make an objective finding on the mental disability between person to person. So the correct answer is C. A person with a physical disability must act as would a reasonable person with the same disability. Now it's correct because a physical disability can be measured and there is no ambiguity between a person with a physical disability and a person with a normal, because there's no ambiguity between them. It's very clear that this person is physically disabled and this person has normal sensibilities. So therefore C is correct.